All right, friends, let's jump right into it. This is Parshat Toldot, and very powerful things happen in Toldot. They would be written up in a book that JFK put together called Profiles in Courage. But the character that would be central, at least from this week's Parsha, in that story might surprise you. It's so important for us to know that the covenantal journey that God begins with Avraham didn't only begin with Avraham. It begins with Avraham and Sarah. So too does this next generation, which is the name of the Parsha Toldot, embody the next step in the covenantal journey. But it's interesting to think about who in that generation actually inherits the mantle of leadership, the profile of courage that Avraham was. If you look at last week's Parsha, when Avram wants to find a wife for his son, which is a strange pattern in the Torah, it seems that Isaac was unable to leave home and find his own partner in life. He wasn't allowed. Abraham freaks out when his servant says, "Why wouldn't Isaac just go?" Abraham says, "No, he must not go." And when the servant does go, he meets a woman who can lug enormous quantities of water to feed an entire caravan of animals and someone who is very thirsty after a desert journey. And that when the daughter, Rivka, brings the servant back, the servant has the conversation about Rivka coming and becoming Isaac's wife. But her household, her family turns to her and says, "Let her speak." Does she agree to go? And she says, "Elech." The language of Elech is actually a throwback to the language of Lech Lecha. Avram is told, "You go." And Rebecca says, "I will go." Very powerful. Even Abraham doesn't respond to God's command by saying Elech. He just goes. But Rivka's voice matters. In this week's Parsha, there's a famous deception scene at the end of Isaac's life, where because of Rebecca's manipulations, Jacob dresses in the clothing of his brother Esau to trick their father and inherit the birthright. In fact, Rebecca acts in the most subversive and powerful ways because ultimately sometimes someone has to. Someone has to stand in the breach, demonstrate courage, and make sure that what's supposed to happen does. There are heroes like that walk today. I am blessed in my life to have that hero be my wife and to watch as she takes powerful strides, saying important truths that other people in the world would hesitate from saying. Because ultimately, the world doesn't move forward unless sometimes we move it forward. It is incredible to see how heroes, complicated human beings like JFK, really did turn history on a pivot toward more peace. Complicated, imperfect, absolutely. But Rebecca's character is also complicated. Think about why Rebecca is so essential in the journey of our people. She demonstrates chutzpah. She demonstrates pivotal strength, a courage unlike anything, because in a tent that was only for men, Isaac is on his deathbed. His eyes had grown dim, says this Parsha. And Rebecca figures out how to make sure, how to orchestrate, how to manipulate the moment so that Jacob will receive the blessing. And I know that sounds maybe not only praiseworthy, but if you remember, when she was pregnant with the twins, she went and spoke to God about it and said, "What is happening in me?" And the response from God is, "There are two nations warring within you. The younger will inherit." Well, the only way that was going to happen in real time was for Rebecca to take destiny into her own hands. Now, does that leave her children, both of her sons, in a good position? Of course not. Has Jewish history and Muslim history and Christian history and history, has it been simple? Of course not. Can we trace some of this animosity towards the biblical language itself and the choices we've made as a people? Maybe. But every once in a while, it takes someone standing in the breach so that the right thing will happen. History doesn't move gently. This is beautiful teaching, which actually originally came from a Unitarian minister during the Revolutionary War. We attribute it to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Dr. King did make it more famous than the original speaker. But the idea that the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice, that's a beautiful concept, but it's not a Jewish idea. A Jewish idea would be something like the arc of history is long and we must bend it towards justice. Nothing naturally moves in the right direction. Yes, history unfolds, but we don't want history to unfold. We want a good history to unfold. We want noble, righteous, tzidkut, righteousness. We dream about a better day. So I want to bless us to think about moments that stand out, when we have witnessed courage, maybe when we have been courageous. That's heroic. The veteran who was at Club Q in Colorado Springs, who sprung into action and stopped the massacre from becoming much worse just Saturday night. Human beings who show up as human beings when other people are not being quite human. That's heroic too. Yes, Ayala is suggesting a very good question. Wouldn't it have been better if she had sat down with Isaac to talk about it instead? After all, they had lived so deeply. Ayala, I think that makes you a warm and loving, wise human being. We can't go back and relive biblical narratives. If we could, can you imagine all the changes we would make to our story? And yes, part of the process of Midrash is thinking about how things could have been different or filling in the gaps where things don't quite make sense. So we should never hold back our imaginations and wondering what kind of conversations could happen. But it's important to learn from models of the past and sometimes to praise them. Valerie is saying something important. I hope you will all join me at noon today on a very important update. You can find the information on this Facebook page once we're done. An update from UJA and with all of our partners who together, with support from our communal security services infrastructure that we fund with a lot of funding, stopped a terrorist attack on the Jewish community of New York, also this past Saturday. That is an act of courage, systemic courage, which I hope that you will pause today not only to become more informed about, but also that you will choose to support even more deeply. Rebecca represents, listen to how Natalie says it, all of the women who have worked hard to create change and are not necessarily heard. This is a very, very important thing for us to amplify. The matriarchs of Jewish history are still being born. And Rebecca can serve as a powerful model for getting things done. The most important stories in the Torah often hinge on the actions of women. I'll give you one example and then we'll close the learning for today. I was in a class when I was training to be a rabbi that Professor Diane Sharon was teaching, and it was a wonderful class. And she asked a question, the very first class, who's the most important character in the entire Torah? And, Moses, or somebody, even God, or, we just named the people that came to mind quickly. And she said, it was so interesting. She said the most important person in the Torah was Potiphar's wife. Now, we haven't gotten there in the book of Breshit this year, but you might remember the story that she falsely accuses Yosef of sexual assault and has him thrown in prison. So it was a little bit astounding when she said Potiphar's wife. And she said, if Potiphar's wife hadn't done what she did, Joseph would never have been thrown into jail. If Joseph had never been thrown into jail, he never would have met the baker and the butler. And if he hadn't met the butler wouldn't have had his dream interpreted. And if the butler's dream hadn't been interpreted, he wouldn't have told Pharaoh that there was someone in jail who could interpret the dreams. And Pharaoh would have never met Joseph, and Joseph wouldn't have interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, and the world wouldn't have had enough to eat during the 7 years of hunger. So Potiphar's wife. And I know that sounds entertaining, but think about so many moments of human history where the change that happened might remain invisible unless we name it. Unless we name it. And in the memory of our matriarch Rebecca, let's bless the leaders of our community who are profiles of courage, who do what needs to be done and sometimes really wish they didn't have to. But that's what courage is, doing what must be done. So bless you, friends. Bless you with a good day, a day where you demonstrate courage. I hope to see you at 12 o'clock at the briefing, and I'm very, very grateful that we have these moments together. Someone said to me recently, 670 plus, that's a lot. How do you always have things to say? And the point is the Torah is very, very full. And part of the reason Torah is so full is because we're here. We have things to say. Thank you, friends, for being part of this community. Very, very grateful that we get to do this. Let's sing our way into a good day, friends. Bless you, friends. See you tomorrow. Take care.